Sex. It's on our screens, in our ads, in the music we hear, and the movies we watch. It's on the billboards we pass when we drive through the city, in the memes that go viral, in the small talk during happy hour, and in the deep conversations after midnight. It's everywhere. Yet for women, it can feel like our biggest secret. For centuries, conversations about women's sexuality have been filtered through what society has deemed as acceptable. We've been told to be desirable, but not too desiring, to please, but not to ask for pleasure, and to fit into expectations, but never to expect. But what happens when we rewrite the narrative, start owning our desires, our bodies, and our stories? It's time to get out of our comfort zones. This is Watch Her Cook. I'm Cassie.
And I'm Danielle.
Welcome back to Watch Her Cook, a podcast dedicated to sharing the incredible lives of women who have taken their power back throughout history.
I will just say this, it's bold, but this is definitely my favorite episode of the show that we have done so far, and likely will do for quite a while. And I say that's a bold statement because every single woman that we include in our show is for a reason, because they're incredible. But I love this woman.
You're just drawn to her story. I mean, episode 4, starting off strong to say this is your favorite. But I agree. I really love her. And I'm really excited to talk about her because I just feel like, one, before this research, I didn't know about her. Mm-hmm. And 2, I just think that this is a relevant conversation for today and in the past and for all women who are listening. And it's a really empowering, insightful episode.
Yeah, so we'll get into it. Let's introduce her because, as you alluded to in the introduction, it is all about sex. And, well, not all about sex, but mostly about sex. And, you know, one of the things I love about Watch Her Cook is the opportunity to have different discussions that we aren't able to have on National Park After Dark, our other podcast. And it's crazy because, you know, we've been podcasting for over 4 years, and there's going to be a lot of subjects that we're going to have conversations about that we've never had in this way, you know, on a show. And they're so worthy of having, and people are going to get to know us in a different way. And we haven't talked about sex like this before, but I'm ready.
I don't know if we've talked about sex really ever.
Well, get ready,
but people, we are not shying away today because today is all about women embracing their sexuality and being able to talk about sex openly without embarrassment or shame. So we're here to talk about it all. And this woman and how she influenced it all.
Right. So let's talk about Shere Hite. Shere Hite was an author, sex educator, feminist, and self-proclaimed cultural historian whose work revolutionized how we understand female sexuality. In the 1970s, her book, The Hite Report, shattered taboos by amplifying women's voices about their own pleasure and experiences. Despite facing intense backlash, she remained committed to challenging outdated narratives and advocating for sexual liberation. Her impact still shapes conversations about women's autonomy and desire today.
Shere was born Shirley Diana Gregory on November 2nd, 1942 in St. Joseph, Missouri. She was given the name Shere to distinguish her from her mother and adopted her stepfather's last name after her parents' divorce, coming to be known as Shere Hite. Shere had a turbulent childhood. Her mother had her at 16, and her father was absent for most of her life. She was primarily raised by her grandparents before they got divorced and eventually moved in with her aunt. Her earliest dream was to become a classical composer. Her second choice was to, quote, figure out how society got to where it is and why it is so irrational.
See?
I feel ya. I feel you, Shere. We're still asking that question.
She attended the University of Florida, where she earned both a bachelor's and a master's degree in history before moving to New York in the late 1960s to pursue a PhD in social history at Columbia University. Shere eventually dropped out, citing that the university was too conservative. Described by her friend as ridiculously beautiful and someone whose slenderness and elegance belonged more on screen than real life, Shere took on modeling jobs to support herself. These gigs ranged from book illustrations to posing for Playboy.
In 1972, she appeared in an advertisement for Olivetti typewriters as a part of their well-known Olivetti Girls campaign. This iconic series, which ran throughout the late 60s and early 70s, featured stylish young women in office settings, typically cast as secretaries. The ad's messaging carried a patronizing tone, reinforcing the gender stereotypes of the time, which presented women in subordinate roles. When Shere's ad was released, she was infuriated by the tagline, which read something to the effect of, quote, "The typewriter so smart, she doesn't have to be." This ad marked a pivotal turning point in Shere's life. The experience ignited her life's purpose to challenge and dismantle society's narrow and limiting views of women. And just imagine agreeing to be in an ad campaign and being paid for it and not realizing that the ad campaign was going to paint you as stupid.
I know. We're going to get into it more, but we both watched a documentary on Cher, her life and her work. And in the documentary, it featured this advertisement. Just seeing it on screen and seeing kind of the way that not only the tagline was incorporated, but the way in which they really painted women to just be this like empty shell of a like kind of robotic, Stepford wife type of look and feel to them. And it was really jarring to see.
Yeah, it was really jarring to see, especially in our time. That has not aged well. And if that was put on television today, there would definitely not be a good response to it. And there wasn't a good response then either.
And also kind of to just circle back to her education and how she, after that, after obtaining all levels of education, all the way going up to almost PhD level, and then having to look for work in all of these different ways, including being like an extra in a commercial, but doing just different side work and things like that. And you usually don't equate people with high levels of education needing to be like, God, I can't find work.
Yeah.
And that was the story for a lot of different women at the time. It's not just Cher's, but also, posing for Playboy, that comes back around as well, as far as people not taking her seriously and her work seriously. And
they took her look seriously.
Oh, yeah.
That was okay. But as far as her intelligence goes, and a woman in this time getting a PhD was a really big deal because it wasn't as common as it is now. It's normal. Now you see a woman with a PhD and you say, hell yeah. Back then, when a woman had a PhD, it was more thought of, okay, this is great to have for your role as a housewife.
Well, we'll find out pretty soon that she didn't really have an interest in being a housewife, at least not at first. She had some other goals and other things that she wanted to put her focus on and her professional focus on. Before we explore more of Shere's story, it's important to provide some context to the views surrounding social issues of the time. In 1963, feminist author and journalist Betty Friedan published The Feminine Mystique, a book that challenged the notion that women could only find fulfillment in traditional roles as wives and mothers. The book's popularity sparked the second wave of feminism, which lasted from 1963 to 1980. Following the release of the Olivetti ad, Cher attended a march to protest against these harmful campaigns. While at the protest, she was invited to join the New York chapter of the National Organization for Women, also called NOW.
Founded in 1966, NOW is the largest feminist activist organization in the United States, co-founded by Betty Friedan and Polly Murray, a civil rights activist. During the second wave of feminism, consciousness-raising groups emerged as a driving force for change. These were small, grassroots discussion circles that provided women with a space to share their personal experiences on topics like sexism, reproductive rights, and domestic roles. At one of Cher's early meetings at NOW, a discussion about the female orgasm ignited an eye-opening conversation. Women in consciousness-raising groups had openly shared that they were dissatisfied with heterosexual sex, with many admitting they had never experienced an orgasm through intercourse. Shocked by the lack of research on female pleasure, Shere began independently exploring sexology, determined to bridge the knowledge gap.
In 1974, she published her first book, Sexual Honesty, By Women, For Women, a collection of firsthand accounts from thousands of women of diverse backgrounds, ages, and sexual orientations. The book challenged societal taboos and conventional narratives about female sexuality, sparking widespread discussion. This research laid the foundation for what would become Shere's most critically acclaimed work, The Hite Report, a nationwide study of female sexuality, published in 1976.
The Hite Report compiled results of approximately 3,000 questionnaires that Hite distributed to 100,000 women in the United States between the ages of 14 to 78. She traveled on her boyfriend's motorcycle across New York City to hand out the surveys to women, advertised them nationally in magazines, and included mailers for them in her first book. The report presented several key findings. One study revealed that the majority of women masturbated regularly, a topic that was rarely discussed in mainstream conversations. Another highlighted that women felt frustrated by their male partner's neglect of their sexual needs, often feeling like sex was designed for men. And another revealed that 70% of women did not experience orgasms through intercourse alone, finding greater satisfaction through clitoral stimulation. This directly challenged the belief that penetration was the primary source of female pleasure.
And this all is, as we are going to discuss, groundbreaking.
Yes.
You know, for the time, this information to be put out so publicly and in this way was up until that time pretty unheard of. And it really shocked the nation. But I can't help but think of, you know, all of this stuff, you're listing it off and I'm like, okay, yep, heard that before. I've had discussions about this before with my friends. Like these are things that are not groundbreaking to me. And that goes to show that these conversations have been had before openly in my world.
Right.
And that's because of work, this initial seed that was planted and things that came from this. And we live in a time now, at least in, you know, our world, in our, you know, corner of the world and in our lives, where this is a conversation that is able to be had. And we're talking about it on a podcast.
Right. We're talking about it on a podcast, which was not the norm. I mean, a radio show, nothing like that would have happened. And it is more the norm. You know, you talk about this with your friends and hopefully your partner. But I will say, I think that it still widely is this taboo subject for a lot of people. And almost there's a lot of shame, I think, that's behind pleasure and sex, especially for women. And I think that these conversations are really important to still be having. And I really love how she did this whole study. So as a background for me, I studied psychology and I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. And in school, I took two different classes that were some of my favorite classes that I took. And one was the psychology of women, and the other one was the psychology of love and sex. And neither of them talked about the Hite Report, which I think is really interesting now, looking back on my course, that wasn't included. And I just think that it's very interesting because we talked about a lot of different studies throughout that talked about women and their relationships. And we talked about so for psychology of women, it talked more about mental health and it talked more about different genders and the LGBTQ communities and things like that within the class. But we never, and then even in love and sex, it was very different of that. We talked about it more in a health perspective of how people are uncomfortable having conversations that surround STDs and protection because of embarrassment and how there's like this whole shame around that. So I think that it was really interesting that the Hite Report that she studied 3,000, that she got 3,000 people to answer questionnaires in a time that people were not open about talking about it. But for her and the way that she went about it, she was able to get this huge study of people, of women, to come out and express some of their like deepest maybe most secret things about themselves to share it and to get this data that said that people are widely uncomfortable and women are unhappy in their sexual lives.
Yeah. Would you have filled out the survey, do you think? Because we both got a good idea of the types of questions and things like that on it in the documentary that was called, for everyone listening, it's called The Disappearance of Shere Hite, if you're interested. But what do you think?
Me now, yes, definitely. And I have filled out surveys similar just in college. But back then, I don't know. Just because there was a lot of shame around it and people didn't talk about it. And I don't know. I don't know if I would have been comfortable. What about
Yeah.
you? Do you think you would have filled it out?
Well, it's almost impossible to say, we weren't women in the 60s, but I would like
Right.
to say yes. I mean, I remember in growing up, in our teenage years when Cosmo and all these other magazines were kind of all the rage, there were so many different quizzes in there and surveys and stuff like that. Everything from, like horoscope stuff to personality traits to
Oh, that's such a
sexual
throwback that
things.
you're bringing up. Cosmo polls and questionnaires.
But yeah, I loved it. I love anything that really, this survey is a little bit different because it doesn't reveal anything about you. Like, here's this questionnaire, fill it out, and there's results, and we'll tell you something about you. It's not really like that. But I enjoy filling things out like this. And I really enjoy the subject of female pleasure and standing up for and expressing and being transparent and having open conversations about what you desire, what you need, and vice versa from your partner and things like that. So some of the questions that were included in the survey that Cher put out included everything from, I think she kind of started off with some softballs, warmed people up. How often do you have sex? How often do you have sex? Who are you having sex with? Is it a partner? Is it a spouse? Or what gender are they? Just kind of, she just really mounted up and started to get more in depth and maybe more into territory that people are kind of like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe that she's asking this. Everything up to, how often do you masturbate? Or do you masturbate? How often do you masturbate? In which ways do you masturbate? And all the way up to like, is it clitoral? Is it intercourse? Is it anal? Is it a combination? Are you by yourself? Do you have outside help? Do you do it with a partner? All the way up to like, when you orgasm, what does it feel like? Can you describe it? Have you ever had an orgasm? What was the first time you had an orgasm? At what age? Like, do you talk about this with your partner? How often do you orgasm with a partner? Just like so many different questions that really, I think, made a lot of women pause and evaluate. Because if it was the norm at the time to just, when you're in a sexual relationship with a man, that it's kind of like, I know how this is going to go. It's going to last about 5 minutes. He's going to do this, this, and this to me. He's going to have a good time. I'm going to leave either uncomfortable or unsatisfied, or like, it was a good time, but I probably didn't reach orgasm. And if that's just like the way of things are and just the norm, I don't think you really question it much. And this was an opportunity for women to sit down and really take account of their own experiences and really look at their part in this,
Right. And a big part of what she was researching with this group of people and with these questions is there was this narrative that was portrayed publicly that women have a hard time having orgasms. Stop.
Mm-hmm.
And what she was investigating in these questions is, okay, do women have a hard time having orgasms, or do they have a hard time orgasming with their partner?
Right.
And where does that stem from? And she definitely, these questions were very, like, I think took a lot of people back and then made a lot of people think, and then a lot of people responded. But then, of course, when she published her book, The Hite Report, it just got so much attention because it was so out of the norm for someone to talk about.
Long gone are the days of waiting to be seen in a doctor's office only to have that awkward conversation with your healthcare provider. WISP gives you access to sexual and reproductive healthcare from the comfort of your home. Get treatment for BV, yeast infections, UTIs, and much more delivered directly to your home or ready for pickup at your local pharmacy in less than 3 hours. The best part? WISP is discreet, convenient, and you don't need medical insurance to receive care or prescription medication. Visit us today at hellowisp.com.
This episode is brought to you by the Toyota Grand Highlander. From daily routines to life-changing adventures, the Toyota Grand Highlander is spacious, powerful, and ready to take on life's grand challenges. Advanced safety features and innovative technology give you confidence for whatever life throws at you. And it's available in a hybrid Nightshade Special Edition, which includes sophisticated gloss black exterior accents and 20-inch black alloy wheels. Learn more at toyota.com/Grand Highlander. Toyota, let's go places.
So the Hite Report gained widespread popularity and was reviewed with other classic works on sexuality at the time, including the Kinsey Report as well as the Masters and Johnson reports. The book was split into 8 chapters: masturbation, orgasm, intercourse, clitoral stimulation, lesbianism, sexual slavery, the sexual revolution, and older women. In a New York Times review of the book in 1976, Erica Jung wrote, quote, "Women who read it will feel enormously reassured about their own sexuality, and if enough men read it, the quality of sex in America is bound to improve." However, the backlash surrounding her book became an uphill battle for Shere. Men felt threatened with the studies gaining public attention, and Playboy released a story alluding to the report being, quote, anti-male and dubbing it the Hate Report.
Isn't that so interesting?
Especially now what we know about Hugh Hefner and that whole...
Well, even that aside, even at the most basic level, they're happy to publish Shere topless and revealing herself in their magazine. But as soon as she publishes this work that has, not direct criticism at men, and it was never meant to be that. It was simply telling women's experience with men, in part. I mean, it wasn't just about that. But now all of a sudden...
helping men.
Right? I would think you'd want to know this information. Like, a rising tide lifts all boats. You know what I mean? Like, let's...
Yeah.
This is benefiting.
Let's come together
everyone.
Here.
Like, literally.
Literally.
Wow.
Wow.
I feel like ending the episode right there, but we won't. Okay. Her public persona, an unapologetic, liberal, fashion-forward woman with platinum blonde hair and bold red lipstick who had posed for Playboy, made her a target for criticism. The backlash largely stemmed from Shere's candid exploration of topics that had been long considered off-limits. She shared direct quotes from women across America about their genuine experiences and frustrations with their sexuality, covering topics like female masturbation, lesbian sex, and the pressure women felt to please their male partners. These intimate accounts painted a picture of the reality many women were living with but had been silenced by. Some examples from the report include, quote, "Masturbation is better than bad sex with an incompatible partner. I perform and boost his ego and confidence. I do not like to think of myself as a performer, but I feel judged and also judge myself when I don't have an orgasm. The basic difference with a woman is that there's no end. It's like a circle. It goes on and on."
A male journalist writing for the Miami Herald argued, quote, "What annoys me about the Hite Report is its smug assumption that just because women made these comments, they're true."
That quote annoys me, so.
Just because a woman expressed her experience. I mean, what do you mean? A woman is telling you her experience and you're saying it's not true?
Well, and it kind of just like goes to prove the point of that part of that second quote of feeling judged, and that's why they're performing. It's like they're obviously uncomfortable having conversations, authentic, transparent conversations with their partners for fear of being judged and criticized and probably being called annoying.
Right. And then the first thing that comes out is a publicized article that calls it annoying and criticizes even the thought of women coming forward and expressing their experiences and immediately denouncing them.
Yep. Ultimately, the Hite report brought light to the deeply misogynistic attitudes of the time. It posed a threat to the male-dominated narrative surrounding female sexuality, and it made clear that societal attitudes towards women's autonomy and sexual agency were changing.
I think that this is so interesting that this was happening in this time. And I just have to ask, why do you think men felt so threatened when improving pleasure for women would mean better sex and relationships for them as well? I mean, all of this would be beneficial for everyone.
Well, I've been thinking about that, and I thought about that a lot because it seems wild to be so
Like offended
when this is something that, if you better understood, would make the experience better for you. Like, you're gonna gain here. Like, why wouldn't you want to be with, somebody who's comfortable with you? It's just going to enhance your experience. And so for me, I was like, okay, what I'm trying to think of this from a different point of view because I'm having a really hard time. And then when we watched the documentary, I forget, I think it was in, so there was a segment in the documentary that showed some archival footage from a Oprah show. And she had Cher on, and the whole theme of the show was it was quite incredible. This is when she's getting backlash about the book and the report and everything that was coming out of it. So the show decided to have Cher on to talk about that, but the audience was all male. And they did that to kind of showcase, like, okay, to ask her questions, give your opinion. Like, we want to understand from the male perspective what all this is about. Like, why are you so upset? And it came out that, somebody stood up and was like, well, if women are figuring out how to have pleasure and having orgasms and having these conversations and can orgasm through masturbation, what will be the point of us? Like, what?
It comes down to just solely being threatened. And it's just a weird stance to have, though. Like, I get maybe for a second being like, okay, maybe it's a hard hit to realize that you're not doing everything that you should be in the bedroom. Okay, I can understand that. But then to not take this as, okay, if you're worried about women orgasming alone and getting rid of you, then why don't you just learn how to make her orgasm?
Well, the other part of this is like, do you not masturbate?
Right.
That's never a question. It's like, no one's saying, oh, if men can figure out how to masturbate, what do they need women for? No one's ever had that thought.
No one has ever thought that. No man has ever thought that masturbation was better than sleeping with a partner.
Or a replacement for a partner.
Yes.
So that argument was kind of null and void to me almost immediately. And again, I've spent a lot of time since learning of Cher and what this report was and what these findings were and the criticism that came from it. I'm trying really hard to understand the backlash for it and the male community in particular, because I think it's also interesting that this book, it touches upon female sexuality as a whole, and it never once shames men outwardly. It just says, hey, here's some room for improvement.
Yeah. And it's just laying out how women are feeling and the experiences women are largely having as a whole. And it doesn't say, oh, men, you're doing something bad. It's saying, men, we have a lot to learn here. There's a lot of information that's not available to you or has not in the past. So let's open up these conversations and talk about it versus not ever mentioning it, and then we just stay in this stagnant spot where women are not satisfied and not feeling pleasure and are unhappy in their sexual lives while men just look the other way while it's happening.
Yeah.
Like, this is for everyone's benefit. Everyone feels better when you are both having an experience that you're enjoying.
Agreed. And one of the women who was being interviewed for the documentary put it so well. She was like, this wasn't sending digs at anyone in particular. This was essentially saying, hey, we've been doing this all wrong. Like, we've been under the impression as a society that strictly intercourse is good enough for women, and it's not. We found out that there's a thing called the clitoris, and that's where the pleasure center lies, and let's incorporate that more. And that's kind of being like, she was saying, it's as if we've been all under the impression for centuries that the male pleasure center is in his balls and not his penis. It's like, yeah, you'll rub up against every once in a while you're, doing something else, but the focus is all wrong. It's all backwards, and it's like, that would be
and then
absurd
they said, imagine,
to men.
Imagine if women were just going around just only touching your balls,
ignoring the
nothing
penis.
else.
Yeah, it's
Ignoring
like, hello.
the penis entirely. It's like you're so close, but you're just really missing it.
It's right there.
Well, despite all this backlash that Shere was getting, she continued her research. In 1981, she followed her report on female sexuality with the book The Hite Report on Male Sexuality. So she comes back and says, hey, okay, I'll do it on men too. Like her first book, Shere invited men to anonymously describe their answers on a questionnaire, this time surveying over 7,000 men ages 13 to 97. Similar to women, many men said that they were, quote, felt trapped by sexual stereotypes, craved emotional intimacy, and found themselves unable to talk openly about their sexual angers, anxieties, and desires.
Shere continued to face intense scrutiny. Another source of controversy stemmed from Shere's research methods. While Kinsey gathered statistical data through structured interviews and Masters and Johnson conducted psychological studies by directly observing sexual activity in a controlled environment, Hite took a more qualitative approach, collecting thousands of open-ended responses from women about their personal experiences. As both of her reports relied heavily on self-reported data, critics argued that this kind of survey was unscientific and unreliable. Some also suggested that it reflected a biased sample. Since she used magazines and mailers in her book to distribute the questions, many of the respondents were likely highly educated or already involved in the feminist or sexual liberation movements.
However, Shere defended her methodology, arguing that she was offering an authentic look at people's lived experiences. Her research prioritized women's voices and was revolutionary in that it took the subjective nature of sexual experience seriously at a time when such topics were often dismissed and stigmatized. Her belief was that it wasn't about numbers, but about human experience, and this was a way to make sense of those voices.
I think there's a few things to talk about here, especially going back to her other book about men, because she was so harshly criticized about her first book, The Hite Report, about female sexuality. So like you said, okay, let's do it for men, see what happens. And I just think there's some parallels here between what women were revealing about their experiences and what men were frustrated by and their experiences. And while different, I think the biggest thing and biggest takeaway from the results is that there's not communication.
Right. And one thing that I took from the documentary that we watched that I thought was really interesting. So how I said before, men found themselves they felt like they found themselves unable to talk openly about their sexual angers, anxieties, and desires. In the documentary, there is a moment where a man is being interviewed and he is very defensive and he says, none of this is true. None of my friends have ever said anything to this extent ever. We've never talked about it. It's not true. It's like, that is an example that you have 7,000 men are writing in that this is true. And I felt like it was really an example of how men, not only are they not comfortable talking about it, but they're valid in their feelings that they're going to be shut down about it.
Right.
And that they don't have the safe space to communicate, at least among their male friends.
And that kind of opens the door to the second part that I think we just should discuss at least a little bit, because a lot of this criticism didn't come solely based off of what Shere was reporting, but how she collected the information. So if you had to choose between, hard numbers, having, what did we say? Having sex in like a scientific vacuum, which is crazy to me. Like, do you think those numbers are really reflective of true experience? Probably not. But basically what I'm asking is, do you think that between the hard numbers or personal stories, which do you think tells the truest story?
I think the way that she conducted her data is really interesting. I think that it is very out of the norm. She also has a really broad range of like a sample size of people, because she's talking to 14, I think it was 14 to 78-year-olds, 8-year-olds. So obviously that's a huge spectrum. You are speaking to people from all different backgrounds. And in these reports, they did mention their backgrounds. People said their race, their education, and they did detail that. So she did know that going into her report. And I think that it's really interesting, because I think a lot of surveys and data do go by numbers, and they say, check this box if you agree here. Check this if you think this. Have you ever felt this way? Yes or no? But I think that the way that she was conducting her data really answered the questions that she was looking for to answer. She wasn't looking for numbers. She was really on the emotional side of things. So I don't think she could have gotten the results that she got if she did like multiple choice answers, yes or no, and influence the questions. For her, she just said, hey, let me know this. And people wrote from their own voices. And she was able to collect this data that showed not only a lot of different experiences, but shared experiences from people who were not speaking to each other, writing about the same thing. And I don't think she could have gotten that from a numbers standpoint of being like 5,000 people said yes to this question.
Right. Especially because if we're looking at it in numbers wise, or a black and white yes, no, there's going to be so much. If I was filling out a survey like that with just yes or no's, it would be so many yes buts or no buts, because there's so much more to tell than just a yes or no answer. Sex is so nuanced and so layered, and there's so much gray area and room for, it's not black and white. And she understood that, and that's why she formulated this survey in this particular way. So she's an intelligent woman. She knows that in order to get a truer sense of really what's going on here, she needs to do something in a different way. And that's what she did. Yeah. So I feel like the way that she was criticized for the collection of her answers, and also when they were trying to mark her for, they just go to privileged people and a certain demographic. In the documentary, it showed examples of the women who were writing in. There was somebody who was the only woman on an all-male shipping container at sea. She was the cook or something like that. This isn't a housewife in the suburbs. This is a woman who's spending months on the high seas as the only woman in a male-dominated field. Like, that's not the norm that people are trying to say, she only collected answers from a certain type of demographic. Like, that's clearly wrong, and it shows in her results. So I think that's kind of null and void as well.
It's like it's just trying to scrutinize or to make it seem like what she didn't do it the right way because she did it different. But she had a huge demographic of people from ages, from locations, from educations, from race, from their sexuality. I mean, she went across the board with this, which I think was really interesting. And also, I think with her study, you couldn't have done yes or no questions or strongly agree, strongly disagree, because I think even when she went into this, she didn't know the question she was asking in some of this, right? Because when she went into this, it was like, tell me, how are you experiencing sex? How are you experiencing masturbation? What is an orgasm like? How do you write that in a yes or no question?
You can't.
That's not what she's researching, right? She's really getting into the emotional, physical. She's getting into everything with it. So I think the reason why her study is so controversial is because she did it so differently. But I also think that's why it makes it so impactful and so important to talk about.
And another last thing before we get back to her story, there's just so much to talk about with this. But
she's so interesting.
She is. And, you know, this topic is so interesting because it's unfortunately still very relevant. We're talking in the 60s, 70s right now, but, you know, the themes of it are still relevant, you know, however many decades later. But, you know, there's this question of why people felt so threatened by her approach and the results and the findings and just everything essentially top to bottom about the Hite report, and why that is, even though she's just simply trying to amplify real people's voices. You know, what's the harm in that? You know, what's the problem? And I saw this quote from, of all people, Voltaire, that I thought was very fitting to answer this. And it says, quote, "If you want to know who controls you, look at who you are not allowed to criticize."
It's very telling.
And I think it comes down to control. Like once, you know, we're amplifying voices, we're recognizing, maybe like let's try and gain some ownership and autonomy and, you know, stand up and speak out. All of a sudden, the control is not what it used to be. And that's scary for a certain group of people. And I think that's really the root of the problem.
Yeah, I think that that's a really valid point. It's putting women in a position of control and power that they have not seen in the past or has been spoken of in the past. And I think especially with a subject that has been deemed so taboo and something you don't talk about and is meant to be strictly behind closed doors, to come out and have women have really strong voices and opinions on this, when women in general, especially in this time, were thought to not be. I mean, you can go back to the ad that Cher was in at the beginning where it labeled her as stupid and a typewriter was smarter than her. And that's very threatening to have that viewpoint of women and then have this other aspect where women are coming out with opinions and intelligence and power. So it definitely changes that dynamic that's going on.
Absolutely.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Paying rent can feel like throwing money away. And when you're spending so much, it can be hard to see yourself buying a home. So Rocket Mortgage is helping you put your monthly rent towards home ownership with Rent Rewards. For the first time, save up to $5,000 off the cost of your first home just by paying rent. Only at Rocket Mortgage. Call 800-4ROCKET or visit rocket.com to find out more.
Rocket Mortgage, LLC. Licensed in all 50 states. NMLSconsumeraccess.org. Number 3030.
In 1985, Cher married German pianist Friedrich Hericke, who she later moved to Germany with. By 1996, Cher had become a German citizen and renounced her U.S. citizenship. Over the years, Cher's conservative critics were determined to crush her free-spirited attitude. In 1987, they seized the opportunity when Cher missed a live interview, skipped a taped one, and allegedly lashed out at her limo driver after he called her dear. On the TV show A Current Affair, Cher was ambushed as interviewer Maury Povich introduced his surprised guest, the limo driver. They kept the cameras rolling until Cher lost her composure, torn down by the mockery they were making of her.
And this was just a fraction of it. These character attacks took an immense toll on her mental health. After being victim of years of relentless, vicious media attacks, public humiliation, and death threats, she no longer had the support of her American publishers and could no longer make a living in the US. Instead, she lived in various places across Europe and dedicated her time to rebuilding her career with a European audience. During this time, she moved in with her friend Joanna Briscoe, who described her as, quote, largely a recluse. She was as fragile as she was tough, as guarded as she was flamboyant.
In 1999, Cher and Friedrich divorced, and she eventually remarried her second husband, Paul Sullivan, in 2012. Over the course of her life, Cher released several publications that changed conventional narratives about sexuality, gender roles, and relationships. Outside of the reports we covered, she continued to explore these themes in books like Women in Love, A Cultural Revolution in Progress, which examined women's emotional and sexual dissatisfaction in relationships, and The Hite Report on the Family, which analyzed changing family dynamics. Through her work, Cher reshaped the conversation around intimacy, desire, and gender expectations. She passed away on September 9th, 2020, at age 77 after complications with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease.
While I think that her story is really inspiring and brave because she came out and did this report, as she did these studies, she never really relented on it. I think it's also really devastating, the response that she got and the fact that she had to leave the United States, start her life in Europe, and she was treated so terribly in the United States that she gave up her citizenship to pursue other endeavors. And I think that that's really unfortunate, especially looking back now. It's something that we can reflect on and be like, no, she was right. She was onto something and she had every right to talk about this. And she brought forward some really important conversations that needed to be had.
Yeah, I think one of the most depressing things about it all is everyone was thinking it. She was just the one saying it for the first time in this way. And she was absolutely destroyed for it. And, in the documentary, it shows a lot of archival footage of her, from the beginning when she first started compiling data to giving interviews and just going throughout the years. You can see the toll, and the documentary did such a brilliant job of painting that picture, of showing this like young, bright, enthusiastic, intelligent person who's really passionate about this and is really eager to have discussions about it. And then just her having to repeat herself over and over and defend herself over and over and just kind of get worn down over time. And that was just like the hardest thing to watch because there's only so much somebody can take, and you really saw that translated. And she did what she could for as long as she could. And I think that I don't blame her at all for, kind of throwing in the towel. I mean, she didn't totally. She still lived her life and lived by her values and spoke.
She made a very good living off of her book as well.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just it was just hard to see that kind of play out in the film. But I think what was really poignant, I wrote down 2 or 3 things at the very end of that documentary that I think is relevant here is at the end, we're hearing from a couple other people, and there is a woman named Clarence Edgar Rosa, who's the founder of the magazine Gaze, and she said, speaking of her early career in journalism, that, quote, I quickly understood that the history of female sexuality was very much a story that repeated itself. It's a story of the successive erasure of knowledge. And then somebody else chimes in and says there is a disappearance of feminist knowledge, systematically, century after century, decade after decade. And it's this cycle that's totally repeated. And then Cher kind of closes out by saying her voice is Dakota Johnson, which is just so fitting for this documentary. And she concludes, male ownership of female sexuality is what makes patriarchy possible. As women, we deserve the right to own our own bodies. I find it troublesome that younger women coming along will have to fight the same battles over and over again. And you would think, that like I'm dedicating my life, I'm kind of like taking the brunt, like I will sacrifice myself, I will endure this
I'll
if
be
it
the
means,
change.
if it means that, like other successive generations and however many thousands of women after me don't have to go through this. And she was very cognizant of the fact that unfortunately that would not be the case, and that this is a discussion that's going to come in waves. And we're seeing that right now.
Yeah, but I will say, I think that even though there's a lot of work to do in these discussions, she really opened some doors to have them. And even through the ridicule that she got, there was also a lot of support there too. I mean, there were thousands of women who wrote into her. Her book was a bestseller, and you can't quiet all those voices. So even though she went through a lot, she really, really opened some doorways to these conversations, and maybe is why we can talk about this on a podcast so publicly now. So today, we are very grateful for the opportunity to highlight Shere's curiosity and resilience. Her courage transformed the way society talks about female sexuality, pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable research and discussion. Today, the Hite Report, a nationwide study of female sexuality, is ranked the 30th best-selling book of all time. As debates on gender roles and sexual freedom continue to evolve, Hite's contributions stand as a powerful reminder that personal experiences and voices can ignite meaningful change. Thank you for tuning in to Watch Her Cook.
If you're looking to dive a little deeper into Shere Hite's story, we've dropped some sources for you in the description. Let us know what incredible women's stories you'd like to hear next.
And a big shout out to Sickbird Productions, who produces our podcast and helps bring these stories to life. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Watch Her Cook Podcast. Leave a review and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Just a reminder, empowered women empower the world. Now let's go cook.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.